He had been silent for 5 years, and the one who made him speak for the first time wasn't a psychologist, but a girl carrying coffee and singing in the corner of a dingy diner. Grayson Hale had everything that people spend their lives chasing, except one thing: his son's voice. He had bought every device, hired the top specialists, and crossed half the country, all in search of a single word, any word. But then, at the moment when he had nearly lost all hope, an old tune crackled out of a dusty speaker, and the boy, who had never uttered a sound, lifted his head and whispered his very first utterance. No one expected. Everything would begin from that moment. All right, my dear viewers, get ready for a story that will leave you speechless. Take a second to like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment below to let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always exciting to see people joining us from all around the world. In the heart of Beverly Hills, where the sun seems to gild every window pane, there sits a penthouse that has never heard the sound of a child's laughter. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls, marble countertops, bedrooms straight out of an architectural magazine, every detail radiates the perfect luxury the world admires. But inside is a void no amount of wealth can ever fill. Grayson Hale was once invincible in the startup world. He didn't sell apps. He sold experiences, the bridge between people and technology. He was hailed as a genius of user behavior, a strategist who could predict the world's needs before the world even knew them. He foresaw everything, except his own son. Luca was born one autumn night heavy with the promise of rain. But when Luca entered the world, Ilara, Grayson's wife, the only love he had ever known, slipped away forever. A sudden obstetric complication, gone in the blink of an eye. By the time Grayson raced to the hospital, Ilara lay unconscious. The first embrace between mother, father, and newborn never happened. He did not cry that night. He wouldn't allow himself to. Grayson had never learned what grief looked like on the face of someone who is always in control. So he buried himself in schedules, in work, in the duty of fatherhood. He bought a smart cradle, hired a private nurse, built a fully equipped Montessori-style sensory therapy room. But among all the things he could provide, he could not create the simplest gift: a home warm enough for a child to feel safe. Luca grew up in silence. No babble, no midnight cries calling for his father. He never said daddy, never reacted to music, never played like other children. At first, Grayson thought it was just delayed speech. But as Luca turned 3, then 4, the doctor finally spoke the words Grayson could not bear to hear. Selective mutism, a psychological inability to speak. Not a defect, but a decision. A child, choosing silence. That phrase haunted him. Choosing? Who chooses not to speak? Who chooses to live separated from the world, seeing everything through wide eyes and never uttering a single word? Grayson refused to accept it. He brought in top specialists from New York. He built a private sound therapy suite in the penthouse. Each session ended in silence. The experts slipped quietly away with their charts, their data, and pitying glances. He understands everything, they told him. He just won't speak. Grayson didn't need analysis. He needed to hear one sound, one word, one sign that his son was with him. Not just a small shadow moving through the vast space. The penthouse became a lavish, soundproof box. No sounds, no heartbeat to remind him of life. Only the cold hum of air conditioning, the flicker of security monitors, and the echo of Grayson's own footsteps as he passed Luca's door each night. He had sold connection to the world, yet to his own son, he was the greatest stranger. And deep inside, a question unspoken twisted in his chest. Was there something inside Luca still waiting to be awakened? Or had his son locked the door to his heart? Forever?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
The rain that day poured over Los Angeles as if intent on washing away every familiar sight. Driving home from Luca's latest therapy session, Grayson's car glided slowly through waterlogged streets, the windshield blurred by cold mist. Luca sat in the back seat, eyes unfocused, tracing unnamed memories in the rivulets sliding down the glass. Grayson had grown accustomed to this silence, to his son existing like a faint shadow in a vibrant world. They had just endured another appointment, one among hundreds of desperate attempts. A new specialist, a new method, the same old questions and the same old results. Grayson no longer expected miracles, yet deep down he still hoped for a small sign, anything to tell him Luca was still in there, behind that thick shell of muteness. As the car crept to a stop at a small intersection near mid-city, Grayson's gaze drifted to the roadside. Through the downpour, he spotted a diner tucked beneath a weathered neon sign flickering dimly. Millie's Diner. It looked lifted from a bygone decade, its red awning faded, vinyl booths cracked with age, fogged windows reflecting the warm light within. And then, in that instant, something happened that hadn't occurred in 5 years. Luca stirred. Not a full movement, but a subtle shift. He no longer stared into empty space. He turned his head, his gaze for the first time fixed on something outside the sealed car. Grayson followed his son's line of sight to where, beyond the misted glass, a young waitress was wiping down a table. She wore an ivory apron, her red curls hastily tied back, and her hands moved in the steady rhythm of routine work. Yet it was not that motion that held Luca's attention, but the faint song drifting through the rain. Somewhere over the rainbow. Her voice was imperfect, untrained, but it was gentle as a whisper on a lonely night. There was something honest and unadorned about it, as if she sang only for herself. And that simple, heartfelt act was enough to make Luca pause, listen, and open his heart for a fleeting moment. Grayson watched his son, his eyes wider than ever, his lashes trembling, a small hand pressed against the window as though to touch that elusive sound. This was no mere reflex, not unconscious. It was Luca's first conscious choice to focus on something. Grayson hardly dared to breathe. In nearly 6 years of fatherhood, he had never seen his son regard anything so intently. A song, a voice, a girl who had no idea that her casual singing had reached a place no doctor ever could. The moment passed swiftly, but left a profound tremor within him. Grayson did not tear his gaze from the diner. For a heartbeat, his world, one he had expertly programmed, managed, and scheduled, was upended by something so simple, it seemed impossible. The presence of an ordinary person doing an ordinary thing at exactly the right moment. When the light turned green, he hadn't yet decided whether to stop. Luca leaned his forehead against the glass as if imprinting the scene on his memory. They said nothing, yet both felt something had begun. A tiny crack had appeared in the solid wall of silence, and Grayson wondered whether, among all the therapies and theories, what his son truly needed might be that simple after all. Just a song, a voice, or someone who cared enough to sing it. The next morning, the sky was clear and the breeze cool, a rare kind of day in Los Angeles, when everything seems gentled by the previous night's rain. Yet inside Grayson Hale, nothing felt calm. A strange sensation lingered from yesterday's moment. He'd witnessed something sacred and still couldn't quite believe it. Luca remained silent as always, his gaze drifting as if he didn't care where the world was headed. But Grayson saw it. He felt the shift, even if only for a second, and he knew he could no longer ignore it. The gray SUV rolled to its usual curbside. Millie's Diner, its sign still flickering over the entrance, stood like an island of constancy in the restless city. Grayson stepped inside, Luca trailing quietly behind, his footsteps as soft as a familiar shadows. The diner was nearly empty. The smells of coffee, fried eggs, and waffles mingled in the air, accompanied by gentle tunes from the old jukebox in the corner. And there she was again. Ruby Layton, her red hair tousled and tied back hastily, was clearing dishes from an empty booth. When she looked up and saw the father and son, her expression flickered with surprise but not alarm. Grayson paused for a moment. He wasn't used to asking favors, but this time he didn't know how else to speak the truth. He said only enough to avoid frightening her. "Could you sing for my son again?" Ruby hesitated. No one had ever made such a request. She never imagined her singing mattered so much to anyone, least of all to a man like Grayson. But when she looked at Luca, the small boy standing there, his wide eyes fixed on her without blinking, she nodded. She didn't sing because she was asked. She sang because that boy had moved her to use her voice. The melody rose again, this time La Vie en Rose. Ruby's voice wasn't powerful nor pitch perfect, but something about how she crooned made everything around them slow down. Luca stood still for a long moment. Then he climbed into the booth beside his father. His small hand touched the tabletop, tapping out hesitant rhythms. No one guided him. No one prompted him. Grayson said nothing, but his heart cracked in two. They returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time Ruby chose a different song, sometimes classic jazz, sometimes a French folk tune, occasionally a childhood lullaby she once loved. With each new melody, Luca tapped a new beat, faster, more assured, as if the sound inside him was finding its way out. Then one morning in the second week, while Ruby was lightly humming a lullaby as she cleared glasses, a miracle occurred. A sound, quiet, very small, from Luca. A brief the same murmured note someone makes when they hear something pleasing. Ruby didn't catch it immediately, but Grayson could not miss it. He leaned forward. Luca sat motionless, eyes still on Ruby. His lips trembled, and once more the hum came, this time prolonged. Grayson felt his chest tighten, not from anxiety, but because hope surged too quickly. Luca, his son, had made his very first sound. Not a word, tamam, but the first echo from the depths of his soul. Ruby stopped and listened. She turned, offering a gentle smile, not of surprise or shock, but as if she had always known it would happen. And in that instant, Grayson understood. A door had just cracked open. It wasn't wide, not yet wide enough for him to walk through, but enough for the light to shine in. And now the question was no longer, is there something inside my son? But rather, how do I keep that door from ever closing again? My dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a drink, then stay tuned for the next surprising chapter. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the story so far so we know you're still here. Grayson was not the type to ask anyone twice for a favor, but this time he knew clearly, if he did not take one more step, he could lose the most precious thing that had just begun to blossom. After the morning Luca made his first sound, Grayson could not sleep. Every small moment replayed endlessly in his mind. Luca's intent gaze, that hesitant hum, Ruby's silent smile. Something had shifted, and he did not want it to fade. He returned to the diner that very evening, finding Ruby clearing the last tables. She did not seem surprised to see him. Perhaps on some level, she too sensed she had done something right. Grayson spoke briefly, no lengthy speech, no elaborate explanation. "I'd like to invite you to my home, to sing for Luca, just like this morning." Ruby paused, not because she didn't want to, but because she feared she wasn't enough. She had once dreamed of stages and spotlights performing in small East Side venues. But life had steered her down a different path, one where bills outnumbered dreams and songs became a private balm. "But I'm no professional," she whispered, almost apologizing. Grayson shook his head. "I don't need a professional. I need someone my son trusts." A few days later, Ruby arrived at the apartment perched above Benedict Canyon. The door opened onto a space unlike any she had known. Bright, neat, modern, and empty. Not for lack of furnishings, but because the air held no warmth. Everything felt frozen in pause. Ruby did not come empty-handed. She carried her old ukulele, a 15th birthday gift. Its strings were worn, and one corner of the body chipped, but its tone remained clear enough to lull a lost soul. Luca sat at the table coloring blank sheets of paper no one knew how to read. When Ruby settled down beside him, he looked up, not with hesitation or fear, but with the quiet expectation of a child awaiting something familiar. She said nothing. She simply began to pluck a few notes, gently. Then she hummed an old children's song. Not loudly, not to impress, merely singing, as though the entire room were a mother's womb, a place without judgment or discipline. Luca paused his coloring. He watched Ruby, then he looked back at Grayson, and then he smiled. A genuine smile, not one learned from adults, but the pure, fleeting grin of a child, bright as sunshine after rain. Grayson did not move. All the sounds within him stopped. Ruby continued to play. She did not prompt Luca or demand a response. She merely sang, telling her story in gentle hand taps, finger snaps, in a call-and-response game she'd invented while babysitting at church. And Luca, in his own way, answered. He tapped his hands, softly at first, then more confidently. Not on the exact beat, but with purpose. He began to vocalize, not words, but syllables, broken, meaningless at first, but true sounds, no longer silence. Ah, la. Three scattered syllables, but to Grayson they were more than sounds. They were blood returning to his son's veins, the first breeze stirring a heart he thought had turned to stone. He looked away, fighting back tears, his throat tight. Emotions surged like waves after a long calm. Ruby kept singing, as though what had just happened were only natural. She needed no praise. She needed no validation. Because the only person she truly wanted to reach was smiling back at her. And in that quiet corner of the room, Grayson believed for the first time, there are things no fortune can buy, but a heartfelt song might just do the trick. That night, Los Angeles lay unusually silent. No car horns, no airplanes overhead, only cold moonlight slipping through the glass curtains, casting a pale glow on the polished wood floors of the luxurious apartment, now less a home and more a chrysalis slowly opening. Ruby arrived later than usual. She'd swapped shifts so she could stay longer. No one asked her to, it was her own choice. From the very first time she stepped into this house, she sensed something shifting, as light as breath, as fragile as morning mist, yet undeniably real. Luca sat at the small wooden table by the window, clutching a pale blue crayon. He didn't look up when Ruby entered, but the slight stiffening of his little shoulders showed he knew, and was waiting, as if it were an important appointment in his inner world. Ruby set her ukulele down on the leather chair. She said nothing, didn't ask what he wanted to hear. She simply sat beside Luca and let her voice do what it had become accustomed to doing, soothing the walls of silence. She chose "You Are My Sunshine," not because it was special, but because it was the whispered promise every child needs at just the right moment. She sang slowly, clearly, her tone soft as if speaking to herself. The opening notes flowed like a gentle stream, seeping into a room that seemed to have dried up all its emotions. Luca continued drawing. He paused sometimes to switch colors. To an outsider, everything appeared normal. But Grayson, standing across the room, felt something tremble inside. An unusual focus, a warmth replacing the chill of silence. When Ruby sang, "You Make Me Happy," "When Skies Are Gray," Luca stopped. His hand still held the crayon, but he no longer colored. His eyes flickered, first at Ruby, then, very slowly, at Grayson. Grayson didn't know whether to stay still, to smile, or to nod. Any reaction felt too grand for that moment. Then Luca whispered, one word, half of the song, a fragment of something long buried beneath layers of fear and withdrawal. "Shine." The sound was so soft it was almost a breath-given form, but distinct, intentional, rhythmic, and coming from the small lips Grayson had thought would never part. Ruby turned. She said nothing. She simply waited. And like a wave returning to shore, Luca repeated, "Sunshine," this time clearer, stronger, a full word spoken not from practice or pressure, but because he wanted to say it. Grayson sank to his knees, unsure why. Perhaps his legs could no longer bear the flood of emotion. Perhaps his heart had just heard what all those years he had only dreamed of, his son's first true word. Luca didn't look at his father. He turned back to his coloring as if what had just happened were the most natural thing in the world. But to the man kneeling on the floor, hand pressed to his lips to hold back tears, nothing in life had ever felt so meaningful. Ruby set her ukulele aside and sat next to Grayson. No words were needed. They both knew a door had swung wide open. No longer a fragile crack, but a beam of real light flooding in. And the strangest part? None of them felt surprised, because deep down they had always believed the spark that heals a child can be nothing more than a song sung wholeheartedly. May in Los Angeles always brings a gentle warmth, as if the city itself learns to soften after seasons of dust storms and sudden downpours. That morning the air felt extraordinarily fresh, sunlight gentle, streets not yet crowded. But inside, Grayson Hale surged a silent storm. It was the day Luca would step on stage for the first time. The event was a small children's music showcase organized by the Therapy Center, a chance for each child to express themselves through music, without competition or judgment, simply to be present. Yet for Grayson, this performance was monumental, the culmination of a 5-year journey he had feared would never reach its end. The venue held only about 80 seats. Parents, relatives, a few therapists, and teachers sat scattered. No professional cameras, no stage lights, yet every person there knew that for these children, approaching the microphone was an act of immense courage. Grayson sat in the second row, Ruby by his side, her red hair neatly pinned back, dressed simply in cream, clutching a thin silk scarf. She said nothing, but Grayson knew her heart trembled with every beat. When Luca's name was announced, a hush fell. Some audience members glanced over, recalling the boy who had not spoken, labeled the selectively mute child for 5 long years. A few smiled with hope, but no one, least of all Grayson, could have imagined what came next. Luca walked on stage, slow but unwavering, cradling the toy guitar Ruby had chosen from a thrift shop. He wore no formal suit, no elaborate costume, just a white shirt and tiny sneakers. Yet the way he carried himself made it seem as if he held the world in his hands. No one cued him to bow, no one prompted him how to begin. Yet Luca stood before the microphone, his big eyes sweeping the room until they rested on the second row. The backing track for Somewhere Over the Rainbow filled the room, the same song Ruby had sung that first morning they met. Then Luca began to sing. Not every word perfectly enunciated, but pure and clear. Each syllable seemed to soak into the air, gentle yet profound, like a whisper from a distant place returning home. Not a breath stirred in the audience. Sometimes in life, moments arrive that demand silence, not out of polite decorum, but because the heart allows no other response. Luca completed the song without missing a beat, never once looking down. And as the final note faded, he looked up. Time seemed to slow. Then, as if the most natural thing in the world, he turned toward Grayson and Ruby, raised his small hand, steadily, confidently, and spoke, his voice clear. "Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Ruby. I love you both." No one reacted for a heartbeat. Grayson collapsed into his seat, as if his entire body could no longer bear him. Tears fell in no particular pattern. He did not know if they were tears of exhaustion, or something deeper, an absolution finally washing over him. Ruby covered her mouth, but could not stifle a quiet sob. She did not cry from surprise. She cried because her faith had been rewarded, because her unconditional love had reached its destination. The hall remained silent. Then, like a gentle wave, applause broke out, measured, heartfelt, unanimous, an acknowledgement that they had witnessed something truly rare, a miracle, not engineered by doctors, not bought by fortune, but born of a child's bravery to step past fear, and two adults brave enough to sit in silent vigil for 5 years. In that moment, no one remembered that Luca had once not spoken. They only remembered the boy who, with all his heart, spoke Dad for the first time. There are doors that cannot be opened with money, degrees, or prestige, but only unlocked through patience, love, and a heart truly willing to listen. Grayson had everything, yet it was the moment he paused to hear the melody of a diner waitress that he reclaimed his son's voice and rediscovered the voice of his own heart. Luca's story is not just about a miracle, but proof that sometimes the greatest healing comes from the most ordinary people. If you are raising a child who is different, living in silence, or awaiting someone's first word, please don't give up. For miracles are often closer than we think. If this story touched you, leave a comment below, share your thoughts, or simply say, I understand. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video so we can spread more heart-touching stories like this. Thank you for listening.